I think it's easy to overlook the unbelievable faith of the widow in our first reading. For context, there was a huge drought in the land at that time. Food and water were scarce and people were starving. God sent Elijah to Zarephath, a Phoenician town, a town full of Gentiles, non-Jewish people. And he sent Elijah specifically to this widow. Now, this widow was beyond destitute. As she later admitted, she only had a tiny handful of flour and a few drops of oil. Her plan was to make a small meal for herself and her son, and then, after that, they would die because they had absolutely nothing else. So when Elijah asked for some food, she explained just how little there was to give. And while Elijah assured her that God would provide, he asked her to first prepare something for him, and then the miracle would take place. What an incredible act of faith, quite literally putting her life and the life of her son into God's hands. How much that must have hurt to hand over that little cake to this stranger. Our gospel is also about giving generously. Like the widow of Zarephath, the woman in the temple gave what little she had, a charity that would probably have gone unnoticed among all the large contributions of the rich pilgrims. But Christ pointed it out and praises her for it. I think the witness of these two women should tell us two things about the quality of our charity. First, it is a lesson for us in all the ways that we have plenty, whether that is money or time or abilities or what have you. Wherever we have plenty, we should be inspired, or at the very least guilted, by these examples into examining ourselves, examining exactly how much of our plenty we give back to God. Are we, like these holy women, giving until it hurts? Or are we giving comfortably from our surplus, like the rich people in the gospel, maybe even feeling smugly superior to those we surpass in quantity, but probably not in quality? But there is another perspective that this should give us on charity, and that is in the areas where we have very little, because God asks us to give from that as well. It's easy to say, I'm short on money, those who have more will make up for it. I have very little time, those with more freedom will volunteer. I'm not great at praying, the priests and monks and nuns will make up for it. And while God doesn't expect us all to give the same quantity, He does expect us all to give the same quality. What do we do with the little that we have? Do we give it? The widow in Zarephath could very easily have pointed to those who had more than she did in the town and turned Elijah away. And the widow in the temple could very easily have said to herself, I don't have to give. God understands. It's easy to understand the first part, that we should be generous in the areas where we have plenty. But the second, still being generous with what little we have, is only truly understood in the context of the liturgy. Elijah's account, in addition to an example of generosity, gives us a prefigurement of the sacrifice spoken of in Hebrews. Just like how the widow of Zarephath's one act of sacrifice was efficacious for a year until the rain came again to the earth, so Jesus' sacrifice, unlike the sacrifices of the priests of old, Jesus' sacrifice is efficacious for all time. Our high priest has entered not the earthly temple, a mere reflection of the real temple, but the true heavenly temple. But the nature of this sacrifice as once for all, a sacrifice that we could never hope to match or equal on our own, does not mean that we are not called to do anything, that we should just sit back and watch. Because Christ wants to take before the Father our contributions to that act of self-sacrifice, so that what we give can share in that infinitely efficacious exchange. This is part of the reason why we decorate our churches with art and fill them with beautiful music, to offer the best of what we have, remembering that what God seeks to give us is far greater. And it is, I think, part of the reason why our Lord chose bread and wine as the Eucharistic species. At the beginning of the liturgy of the Eucharist, the first prayers of the priest call the bread and wine fruit of the earth, fruit of the vine, and work of human hands. I could say the words of consecration over grains of wheat and grapes, but nothing would happen. The changes from wheat to bread and from grapes to wine absolutely pale in comparison to the change from bread and wine into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. Yet it is only through the work of our hands that we can have access to this sacrament. It is only in giving of our very selves that we can open our hearts to receive what Jesus won for us on the cross. And that is why in more normal times, we would bring the collection forward with the bread and wine as a tangible reminder to have the trust of the widow of Zarephath and the selflessness of the widow in the gospel. We should neither be discouraged nor accept as an excuse the greater quantity of someone else's generosity. Rather, drawing inspiration and strength from Christ appearing before God on behalf of all of us in the liturgy, we should seek always to grow in the quality of our charity.